Welcome to the Just Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Aiko Schaefer. We're sitting down today to talk about Polluters Pay legislation. I think it's one of the more exciting efforts happening around climate change. It's not a new idea. In fact, the first campaign I worked on right out of college was a Polluters Pay policy in Massachusetts around toxic pollution. And it's a concept that's a bedrock principle of environmental justice. And advocates have applied the idea to climate change, holding corporations responsible for emissions causing climate disasters and making them pay up. Joining us on the show today to talk about the campaigns and wins across the country are Cassidy DiPaola, Communications Director for the Make Polluters Pay campaign. We also have Gina Ramirez, Midwest Director of Environmental Health at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you, Cass and Gina, for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks, Aiko. I'm so excited to be here.
Both of you are in big cities. When you think about climate policy, there's so much attention around the Southeast because it's a place where a lot of the fossil fuel infrastructure is. People think about the coasts because of the political dynamics. I mean, when you think about Illinois, Gina, you working in the Midwest region, why do you think we should pay attention? What's going on there that should be really something that we're excited in tracking?
Yeah, so the Midwest, I'm awfully biased. I think Midwest is best. We experience all four seasons, although with climate change, that is kind of diminishing. We're seeing summers lasting until October. We really just have summer and winter. In my lifetime, I have kind of seen that. But yeah, Chicago is really close to the BP refinery, which is the largest refinery in the Midwest. And so I live in an environmental justice community on the south side of Chicago, so I have experienced firsthand climate change. And when we think about climate change, it impacts these communities first and worst. And so there's April of this year, Chicago has seen some of the worst flooding and most rainfall in many, many years. We're actually seeing a lot of tornadoes in Illinois. Actually, Illinois is ranked number 2 in tornadoes this year so far. And there's weather folks are actually saying that Tornado Alley is shifting and it's going more into Illinois now. So yeah, we have a lot of, climate disaster victims sharing their stories about flooding, just the trauma of raw sewage on their front lawns, flooding in their basements. And when you live in an environmental justice community like I do, my sewer system is attached to industry. So that is always a concern that industrial waste is coming up into your basement. And so, yeah, climate change is definitely something that is on everyone's radar in Illinois.
Yeah, I can imagine. That is a lot to think about. Cass, you are working nationally across the country. When you look at that, what's kind of giving you hope right now? What helps you get up in the morning and go to work and keep doing this?
I love to describe our fight as a David versus Goliath fight. We're fighting one of the richest industries in the entire world and one of the most powerful, but yet people continue to show up. I'm so inspired by the sheer number of people that come out to rallies, that, join us online, that post videos. And I'm also really inspired by the fact that this Goliath, this massive beast, is very obviously scared by it. They are rolling out one attack after the other on our campaign. They are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in states on their own to fight back against the little people. I think that really inspires me. Us as a movement of individuals that have come together are able to scare the richest industry in the world. I find that incredibly empowering and creates a lot of hope within me.
Yeah, for sure. So, Gina, when you talk about the work that you're doing in Illinois, and you mentioned what's happening there, and I assume that's the reason why working on Polluters Pay is so important and so relevant to people in the Midwest and Illinois in particular. Tell us more about the coalition and the people that are coming together. Who are they? Why are they interested in this issue?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this new coalition in Illinois. We are called the Illinois Make Polluters Pay Coalition, and it has about 40 members right now. And we made sure to be intentional that this is a grassroots-led coalition. So that means that the leadership team consists majority of folks from grassroots or environmental justice communities. Because again, we know folks that experience climate change the worst are those that are closest to the harm. So those that live near industrial facilities, those that have lived near toxic legacy, those that have pollution in their water. So it was really important to have those voices at the table making these decisions because they're the experts of what is the solution to climate change. So it's just really, really thrilling to be part of this coalition. I play a dual role because I work at a big green NRDC, but I also am an impacted person. So I kind of bring both perspectives to the table, which is so exciting. And we have folks from downstate Illinois, from northern Illinois, environmental justice leaders, faith leaders. We have a youth organizer from Urbana-Champaign that goes to University of Illinois. So it's multi-generational, multicultural. We're hitting every angle that we can. And of course, we're bringing labor into our conversations as well, because really this is not only going to impact positively everyone's life, but it's also going to create jobs. There's always a budget deficit in Illinois. And with this climate super fund, this is going to create a surplus of funding to repair things like the lake erosion, like water infrastructure, heat mitigation, climate resilient housing. These are all job creators. So we're so excited to bring the workforce into this conversation as well.
That's great. And in a little bit, we're going to get into the details of the policy and excited to learn more about what you all are developing there in Illinois. There have been states that have passed policies. There are other states that are working on it. Before we get into the policy details, give us kind of a flyover of where the action is across the U.S.
Yeah, there is action everywhere. Across the country, people are fired up about the Make Polluters Pay campaign and the concept of climate superfund bills. So at the federal level, we have a federal climate superfund bill introduced by Senator Van Hollen and Representative Jerry Nadler. We realize it's a slightly difficult time to make progress in our federal government. So it's nice that we have the bill, but I would say that, the coalition isn't making that our priority. But states are really fired up. And I think right now is the time to remind our leaders that they have the ability to make real change at the state level. So we have about a dozen bills introduced across the country, from Rhode Island and Connecticut up to Maine, over to Tennessee, and on our West Coast in Oregon and California. We do have two bills that passed. Our first ever climate superfund bill to pass was in Vermont, and
Yay, Vermont.
Yay, Vermont. As a Adirondacker, I love to see Vermont take the lead. I will say that they're facing some really strong legal opposition from the American Petroleum Institute, the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Department of Justice, and a whole bunch of Republican attorneys general. The second bill that passed was in New York on the very last day of 2024, signed into law by Governor Kathy Hochul. As a New Yorker, we're also facing some attacks by the industry, but we're staying strong. And then there have been some really exciting movements in states as well. So Connecticut just had their bill passed out of the Environmental Committee at the beginning of March. We had Maryland. They were able to pass the first part of their bill, which is a study bill to look into the actual costs of climate damage and how much we can basically send a bill to the industry. So a lot is happening and real progress is being made across the country.
That is just so inspiring to hear. And I love the fact that you're introducing something federally under the circumstances. Why not, right? That's the process. That's what we should be doing, is elevating the conversation. So, Cass, can I ask you another question, which is, what is the level of public support for this idea? Where is the public at on this?
The public loves the idea. I think that's why we're so fired up about it. We have done, since the real start of the campaign, which is, I would say, late 2023, early 2024, we've done extensive polling. Every single time we find that across the board, people overwhelmingly support both the general idea of making polluters pay, as well as the very specific idea of climate superfund bills. I would say our latest polling, which was done in late 2025, found that 78% of Americans support climate superfund bills and support making polluters pay. And you see support with Republicans, with independents, and with Democrats. It's pretty powerful. I think that, it speaks to the fact that people are really tired of being ripped off. People are really tired of massive corporations controlling all of us and making huge profits off of us. And so it's not really too surprising to see that people are coming together behind a campaign that, the biggest aim is to hold these massive polluters accountable, massive corporations accountable, and to make them pay for the damage that they caused.
Yeah. Common sense, simple, easy to understand.
It's so simple that a 6-year-old can understand it. When you make a mess, you clean it up. So I definitely agree that it's very easy to understand.
Yes, definitely, for sure. So Gina, when you think about Illinois and the experience you have personally and as a leader in the community, explain more about the problem that we're trying to solve. You talk a lot about the climate impacts that you're seeing in the Midwest and the shifts in the climate disasters and intensities of those disasters. But when you talk to folks, what's your understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve? What's it costing the state? What's it costing individuals? Help us understand what sort of that bigger picture is, but also the daily experience that people have around this issue.
Yeah, so Illinois communities are just really paying the price for climate change. We've seen precipitation increase by 40%. $6.1 billion is needed to retrofit schools for extreme heat. So growing up, my neighborhood high school did not have air conditioning. We have teachers and students working under these conditions, and it gets really, really hot in Illinois. We've seen $260 million on average in annual flood losses, and home insurance is skyrocketing. I don't know how many. Every year, everyone is complaining about their home insurance going up. So this is hitting everyone's pocketbook. This is hitting everyone's livelihood, and it's also impacting their health. There is a disproportionate impact on folks' health because of climate change. And so really, this is going to address everyone's issues, and it's going to really improve the quality of life. And that is what we really need here in Illinois, especially in these times where folks are scrambling to put food on the table, to pay rent, paying skyrocketing utility bills. If we can help in some way improve their quality of life, this is really the bill to do it.
That's great. Thank you for that. It's a very compelling case that you have. And I think the circumstance that Illinois is facing and many other states the same, and people across the country for sure. So Cass, what are the kind of core constructs of the policy design when you look at how states are going about this?
Well, the basic idea is pretty simple. Scientists have spent decades calculating exactly how much the fossil fuel industry has contributed to the warming of our planet. And of course, they're able to do so by how much oil, gas, and coal that they've extracted and burned. And so climate superfund laws are able to use that research coupled with attribution science and assign each company a proportional share of the cost of climate damages. So for example, let's say that ExxonMobil is responsible for 4% of emissions during the specific time period that a state has chosen. They would cover 4% of the total bill that we put forward. And so, like you said, the laws differ state to state as well as at the federal level, but generally a state will look at about 2 to 3 decades worth of emissions. Usually it's around 1995 to, let's say, 2015, 2020. And I think that time frame is pretty significant because that is when, for certain, the industry knew that the burning of their products was causing deadly climate change. And they spent decades actively funding disinformation to hide it. So we're able to put forth this bill using attribution science based on a company's proportional share of emissions. And then we put it into a fund. Each state has a sort of different way that they manage the fund. I believe in Vermont, it's the Treasury Department that manages their fund. It's someone different in New York. And that fund is specifically earmarked for projects relating to climate resiliency. So think about things like upgraded stormwater infrastructure, flood resistance, especially in places like California and Oregon, wildfire recovery. Some of it has been considered to be put into community solar and clean energy projects. We've considered ways to disperse money to communities that are facing incredibly high utility rates, as Gina mentioned. So there's a variety of different ways that this money can be used, but it is guaranteed to be used towards resiliency and recovery. It's not going into the general budget. And I'll just say, in terms of the differences, almost every bill is pretty much structured the same. The big difference is the bills that choose, or the states that choose to put a number at the front. So in New York, we started with a number. We did the science first, and we said that roughly a very, very conservative estimate on the cost of climate damages between a 20-year period was about $75 billion. And so that was the number we put forth, and that was the number we passed the bill with. So roughly that looks like $35 billion going into New York communities for 25 years. And in Vermont and in a few other places, I believe also in Illinois, we've chosen, and those states have chosen for various reasons, to do the numbers after and be able to use a portion of funding that comes from passing the bill to do that data. And it's been really interesting to see the way in which people respond and state legislators respond to either having that number right out front or assuming, or knowing that we'll do it afterwards.
Very interesting. Having knowledge of the negative impact of their product and hiding it sounds a lot like the tobacco industry, a lot like the work that happened in the past to keep tobacco companies accountable. Gina, where is your bill at? Has it passed? You're currently working it through the legislature?
So we introduced the Illinois Climate Superfund bill in January of this year. We are going to try to pass this, not this session, but next session. We are concurrently outsourcing this climate adaptation study with some folks here in Illinois. So we want to get that specific number to our legislators. We hope to have that study completed by December, and we hope that that research will help get this across the finish line. Something that's different about the Illinois bill is that at least 40% of the funds must benefit disadvantaged communities, which I think is really important, especially since this is a grassroots coalition that is charging the fight here with this bill, that we're in conversations weekly on what this money should be used for. And so to have almost half of this money go to these communities is really an important part of the bill.
Yeah, great idea. Gina, when I think about Chicago and I think about Illinois, I can't help but think about Gary, Indiana. So given the industry that's there and obviously having an impact on Illinois, I guess depending upon which way the wind's blowing, what's your thinking about the work that's happening in Illinois with the recognition that so much industry is next door in Gary and in Indiana?
Yeah, we know pollution does not have borders.
Right.
BP was flaring 2 days ago, and it looked like hell on earth in all of the videos that shown. I know Chicago has sued facilities like U.S. Steel for emissions in the water, but in terms of this bill, we cannot list Indiana facilities, unfortunately, even though we know that that their emissions do cross the border. But there's plenty of polluters in Illinois, and, that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, well, all the more reason that you're pushing at the federal level, right, to be able to have standards across the country, regardless of what state you live in. So in this approach, I find this policy design really, really exciting. It's something that is fundamental to the environmental justice movement. It's something that really is easy to understand. And I actually feel like it's a little different than where we've been on climate. So much of the recent climate conversation, and I say this, I just put up an essay around this, has been really about incentives for corporations, incentives for consumers to do the quote right thing by buying clean energy solutions, that sort of thing. This one is definitely not a carrot. This one is definitely a heavy stick. And I think that we have to use both, right? And I think we've sort of haven't used as many sticks recently. And I think that they're necessary as much as we would like corporations, or to believe that corporations will do the right thing on their own. So Cass, when you think about the campaign shift, do you feel like this takes the movement to a new place? Do you feel like it's kind of different or resonating with people differently, or sort of being questioned within the movement? How's it fit within the broader climate movement?
Absolutely. I think that people are very angry, and They're tired, like I said, of being ripped off. They're tired of not having clean drinking water, of paying incredibly high bills, and not having a safe place to live. And they're tired of seeing all of this happen in their communities while the fossil fuel industry makes $30 million an hour. New data shows that they made $30 million an hour in March of 2026. Meanwhile, we're paying $6 for gas and our communities are being flooded. And so I think that what's different is this campaign and this policy meets people where they're at. And it's not afraid to embrace the anger that people have about massive corporations screwing us over and getting away with it. And we see that in our polling. We'll tell people, we'll say, how do you feel about Make Polluters Pay? Overwhelming support. And then we'll mention, if the fossil fuel industry knew what the burning of their products would do since the 1950s, would this make you more likely to support something like that? Immediately support skyrockets. And I think that people are tired of always offering a carrot to people that have tons of carrots. Yeah. Sometimes the stick is needed. And that's what this policy is all about. And you said it perfectly. The industry won't do things out of the good of their heart because they could have been doing things out of the good of their heart and they haven't been. We need to put this into law and make them pay. And that's what this policy does. And I think it's a real shift. And I think that it's really reinvigorated, at least in my opinion, the climate movement as a whole.
Yeah, I think so too. So Gina, when you're working in the state legislature there in Illinois, what's the conversation? What are the challenges that you're seeing to moving the policy along?
Yeah, I'm very Chicago specific. So, Illinois is really large and there's agriculture and there's folks who really are empathetic to industry. And so breaking through that narrative with all of our, stories of climate victims is going to be really key in breaking down that narrative, especially as an environmental justice advocate. Why would you take a job at the expense of someone's health? And so kind of just hammering that down for centuries, communities have been paying the price literally and figuratively, through their health. They've been paying the price literally through all of these expensive bills. And so now it's just time for these largest polluters to pay their fair share. And so that's why we're getting such a diverse coalition together to kind of come at the legislature at all angles, from faith leaders to teachers to, our elders to labor, that this is something that is desperately needed here in Illinois to even the playing field and to create equity, because right now it just isn't. Folks are paying an exorbitant amount for gas and utilities, and Lake Michigan is eroding, like our beach house, you can't even enter it because the water goes up to the front door. And so folks who can't afford air conditioning in their home in an environmental justice community can't even seek refuge at the beach to cool off in the summer because it is eroding. Or, BP is flaring right next to it, because I live 2 blocks away from Indiana and we know pollution has no borders. So just create, sharing these stories, I think are really powerful. And I don't know how many times I've been told in the 10 years that I've been doing this work that it's a done deal, that these folks are too powerful. I battled the Koch brothers in my neighborhood and won. So I know that there are paths to victory and that people power is real. And that is what we are bringing to the table here.
That's great. So inspiring, Gina. It makes me also think about the community leaders and community in Richmond, California, who also have advancing another strategy around polluter pay. And I think for those communities, just the power, collective power that they're showing is just very, very inspiring. And Cass, I think you're right. People are just very angry. And I think people feel like they don't have any choice except to fight back. And that's what they have to do. So Cass, earlier you talked about the polling data and you mentioned that Republicans also support polluters pay. What is it about this policy that they support?
Republicans are also overwhelmingly experiencing the damages and costs that comes with climate change. The idea of Make Polluters Pay is not just a climate concept. It's not just a climate campaign. It's also an affordability campaign. It's a taxpayer argument. Republicans are not spared from the $1 trillion that Americans are spending every year to combat the climate crisis. And they're seeing that show up in their bills as well. I think that also we saw with the last presidential campaign and election that the idea of populism and fighting back and combating corporate greed is alive and well in the Republican Party as well. And people really don't like the idea of massive corporations and CEOs getting richer. And so that's what's been so powerful about this campaign, is that it can bring in Republicans as well. And we're also speaking to them for the message of energy security and energy freedom. With the money that we bring in from climate superfund bills, we can make our grids more resilient. We can focus on energy, clean energy that is reliable, that is safe, and that doesn't depend on the Strait of Hormuz and whether or not we're at war with a foreign nation. And I think that's really appealing to Republicans as well as independents and Democrats.
Yeah. Gina, when you are working in community in particular, how does the economic conversation resonate, right? We know that industries, whenever we, impose any type of fiscal fee or policy changes on industry, they're always quick to pass it on to consumers, right? They're always going to find a way. I think you were good to argue the financial and personal and health implications of communities. What are the messages and arguments that are really working for you when you're out talking to your neighbors?
Yeah, I think just going back to the polling for Illinois specifically, 70% of Illinois voters support this climate superfund, and 86% of Illinois residents are concerned about rising insurance costs from extreme weather. So again, we're just seeing these extreme storms happening. They're on top of mind for everyone. And home insurance is not paying for flooding repairs. And so folks are just, terrified when it rains. And that's really helping put a light under this bill, because it's going to be summer. There's going to be heat waves. Folks live on heat islands. Folks are going to experience these severe storms and tornadoes that we're having. And everyone is just needing to find a solution. So I've kind of seen that on the ground really resonate with folks. And then just everything is so expensive and they need a lifeline to help support their families. And that would come in terms of lowering the cost of their utility bills. And so this fund could help, create energy efficient homes, which would be amazing for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and you make such an important point that we're already paying for climate damage and climate change, right? The communities that you work with are already paying in so many ways that the industry is already causing in their lives. So why not change it up for sure? So Cass, you mentioned that the industry is really putting up a big fight. Not a surprise. There's a lot to lose. And given the polling numbers that you have, things do not look like they're in their favor. Tell us more about how they're fighting back on a broader scale. What are their arguments? What are they up to?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start by saying that, we've spent a lot of time talking about climate superfund bills, but that is only one part of the broader Make Polluters Pay campaign. We're also focusing on supporting and uplifting climate liability lawsuits and things like windfall profits tax when companies are making billions off of a war, and ending taxpayer subsidies. There's a whole bunch of accountability mechanisms that come within the Make Polluters Pay campaign, and the fossil fuel industry is actively attacking every single one. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is the immunity fight. The fossil fuel industry is trying to basically get a blanket get out of jail free card that would ensure they never have to account for or pay for any of the harms that their products created. And as a very brief history lesson, in 2005, the gun manufacturing industry saw what was happening with mass shootings and gun violence in schools, and they realized that they had a huge liability issue. And they were able to spend a ton of money and lobby the federal government to get this bill called PLACA passed, which has completely shielded gun manufacturers from any type of legal accountability with regards to their products, especially their products being used in school shootings and in gun violence. And the fossil fuel industry looked at this. They now see that they have a trifecta in Congress and with our president, and they are trying to pass a very similar bill. They've been introducing the bill. They just introduced the federal bill. It was introduced by Senator Ted Cruz, Representative Harriet Hageman. What it would do essentially is make it impossible to bring forth climate liability lawsuits and completely nullify state climate superfund bills. And then these bills are also being introduced at the state level. And unfortunately, they're gaining a lot of traction. The first one was passed about a month ago in Utah, and then Tennessee passed theirs. This week, Oklahoma passed theirs. And so what it's doing is saying that the public has no recourse when the fossil fuel industry comes in and destroys our community. We can't really do anything about it. And so if I could say one thing on this podcast today, it would be that we need people to join us in this fight to stop the fossil fuel industry from getting immunity. We need to be able to hold them accountable. Future generations need the right to hold them accountable. And they are doing absolutely everything in their power to stop that from happening.
Great advice for our listeners. Cass, is there a specific way that they can get connected to the campaign, emails, websites, those sorts of things?
Yeah, I would tell our listeners to go to our two websites, noimmunityforbigoil.org and makepolluterspay.net. You can find out more about the fight, about the threat, and all of the ways that you can get involved. So please join us, and together, let's make polluters pay.
Thanks for that, Cass. And then Gina, for people who are living in communities, maybe listening to the show today, any advice that you have for them if they're interested in getting this started in their community?
Yeah, I mean, use Illinois as a resource. If you want to model a bill after our language, we would be happy to sit down at the table and walk you through that. And I just want to empower folks that, we have the receipts. We know that folks have been experiencing higher asthma rates, higher cancer rates, that have been paying exorbitant bills. And so it's time for these fossil fuel industries to pay up. And any way that Illinois can be a resource in our coalition, we are here for you.
That's great. Thanks, Gina. Thank you, Gina and Cass, for being with us today. And thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on the Just Solutions podcast. We'll add information that we covered today on our show notes. Special thanks to our recording engineer, Angel Batista. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts and consider supporting us with a donation. If you'd like to do that or want to learn more about our work at Just Solutions, visit our website at justsolutionscollective.org. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. Together, we are driving community-created and equity-centered solutions to the climate crisis. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.